Well, here we are. We're back to winging it.
Back to winging it, and I think we're going a little bit more local today. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. We're going to be talking to Pete Smith, who I believe lives in Bowmanville.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. So Pete is a painter mostly, and I started following him about maybe 5 or 6 years ago through Facebook, I think, and that time he was working on this very kind of patterned, abstract-y kind of almost looked like the kind of paintings I used to do, the map type painting with patterns. Right. And at some point it shifted, and his work is more more realistic.
Yes.
You know, yeah, that's the best way to describe it. Scenes from around, you know, in reality, and so yeah, be interested to find out from him how and why that shift came about.
Welcome.
Dear.
You've embraced the whole COVID wild man look.
yeah. I kind of joked that I wasn't gonna cut my hair or beard until I went back to work, and it's just not been a joke.
It's going on. You know? It's not stopping.
Yeah.
You might be looking like Billy Gibbons of ZZ Top by the end.
That's right. Yeah, I do trim the edges because it goes like starts to go like really puffy out the sides, but yeah, let it grow a bit.
Yeah. Well, I was just before it hit a year ago, I got a really short haircut. Then, you know, when things lifted, I went back and got another short haircut. So.
Right.
And then Mark, you're
there's nothing I can do. It will always look, regardless COVID or any other disaster, this is how I'm going to look. So
it's a bit of a joke. My wife's a hairdresser, so I mean I can get a haircut anytime I want, and I choose not to. So yeah.
And my daughter is a hairdresser in training, and so I guess we can always get free haircuts, which has been very, very nice for us.
You're making a point. Well, this is a good segue into first question we often like to ask artists, because the past year anyway, is how has the pandemic and the lockdown and all that been impacting you, you know, personally, but also in terms of creatively.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I sort of, you know, I don't even know if you'd say it's been in two phases, but maybe 3 or 4. You know, it's like stages of sort of trauma in a way for all of us, I think.
For sure, yeah.
And I think the first part, I was just kind of, you know, in shock and fear. And, you know, I had been working on a body of work, and it just killed any momentum I had. It made it feel like everything I'd been doing was suddenly meaningless, you know, like the only thing that really mattered was this thing, you know, right. And it felt like, it felt like if there was no, it seemed like also the worst thing to then try and make art about, because it seemed like, well, there's probably 6 million people right now trying to make art about
everybody's home.
You know what I mean? You know, and all of this stuff. And the last thing you want to do as an artist is just do what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
Right.
And then, you know, I kind of came out of that phase. You know, I call it the pajama phase, you know, and got back into the studio and sort of finished up the body of work that I was doing at that time, which was I made a small body of work that's meant hopefully for artist-run centers, that centers around the idea of artists and mental illness.
Okay.
And as a whole, that's how I tend to work. I kind of work around thematic projects. Right. And so I made a lot of those works, and they're kind of quick and immediate, which was kind of the idea for those works. Like they're mostly done in sort of one sitting alla prima painting. And then I took a good break from painting as I tried to figure out what next. So I'd really only thought of things that far. And I'm also not a big summer painter anyways. I'm more of a summer barbecuer.
Well, and you got kids and a family.
Yeah, you know,
it is funny, right? It's harder to get motivated when the weather's really nice because you want to go out and
I
do
think that
other
that's
stuff.
true. And I think especially maybe this year, you know, where
Yeah.
we've been so
all
and
desperate
stuff. And but I'm someone who I think artistically too that breaks are important, because otherwise it feels like you get doing the same thing, and the breaks help me sort of switch gears, you know, and come at things differently. And so yeah, and I've started a new body of work. I'm not entirely sure what it's about, and it's evolving and changing. I think the way I started out thinking about it is different than how I'm thinking about it now. And I think it is related sort of to the pandemic. I was in some ways, like they're very much and I think the two of the last three that I've made are implicitly about it.
You're talking about the works that are very much like they're around your house.
Yeah, exactly. They're all like
environment.
They're in
family and
life
they're
in
meant to be indoor. You know, I was thinking about, you know, like when I started, I was thinking very much about these paintings and thinking about the containment of nature and this desire we have to contain nature, like to own tropical plants. we have
birds.
five birds, yeah. And sort of in a way thinking of it as a metaphor too, like I think there's a relationship between our desire to do that and our desire towards art, right? I think there's a parallel in that, right? Like
sort of taming the wild.
A museum and a zoo are very similar institutions, and they come from the same sort of the Enlightenment period, right?
Yes.
Like they take things from their natural habitat and then they put them in these weird spaces, right? Like these fake little enclosures.
Yeah.
And so it's
attempt to control the wild world.
Yeah, and they're also, I mean, you know, tools of colonialism and symbols of colonial power as well, right? Like, it's like these are the spoils of empire, and it's like, you know, whether that's, you know, a bust from some stolen culture, or it's literally an animal that's been stolen and taken and placed into somewhere, and you know, and I have this sort of ambivalent relationship because I know these things, but I do love zoos and museums, you know what I mean? So, and you know, I don't, but I'm aware of the fact that they're both problematic in certain ways. And that's
there's kind of a tension in there, isn't there? I mean, especially I'm thinking of the zoo, but even the museum as well. There's on the one hand, really the goal is conservation and preservation, right? For posterity, or in the case of animals, to conserve and protect. And it's been a long time since I've been there, but if I recall correctly, the Bowmanville Zoo in particular had a real objective of rescuing animals. Right. So there's that aspect of it, but there is, as you say, there's also this sort of colonialist or post-colonialist.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, those are rooted in historical relationships, just like it is with museums. Like, people aren't, you know, European colonizers aren't exactly going to Africa and stealing shit anymore. Right. Just like they're not going to, you know, all the animals in zoos now are bred in captivity. Right. You know, they're not, or they're rescued, like you said, like one of the big things is people bringing in exotic pets and then getting confiscated at the border. Right. But, you know, like our birds that live in our house, they're as Canadian as I am.
Generations of
they probably, in a generational perspective, they might even be more Canadian, you know. They breed faster. So, you know, but at the same time, you know, and it's a, you know, so I was thinking a lot about that. But then someone mentioned to me how it's very much also, you know, this containment and this indoor thing, and how that relates to our experience in the pandemic, right? And I hadn't even really thought about that, and it's so bizarre to me that I wouldn't have thought about that in doing this. But that, you
in
know,
the pandemic, but in general too, as Canadians, we spend like 8 to 10 months indoors,
absolutely,
right? So we really like, you know, having an interior, you know, recreating some kind of paradise, or, you know, bringing the outdoors in, all that is so much a part of that, I guess, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think as I'm now sort of more, and so I'm not entirely sure how these things are all relating, but they're relating in some kind of way. And I think, like, as I do more of these paintings of plants, like I'm gonna do, I think the next one I'm gonna do is gonna be a painting of a plant that I've already painted, but at a different time of day with different light on it.
Right, right.
And so it's trying to get a sense of, and maybe paint it a few times with different lights to try and get the sense of the passage of time.
Awesome. Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
like of being in the same space and time passing.
Right.
And there's so much of that in this this scenario,
Absolutely.
right?
Oh, absolutely.
The hours of our days, like I've never had so much time. It's crazy, because
It's like, you know, everybody I talk to, it's sort of like this idea of like one day blends into another, and you know.
I am in a situation where I'm in a home that's sort of bursting with life. Like I said, I have 3 children. My mother-in-law lives with us. We have 5 birds. We have 2 dogs.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, there's a lot going on here. But there's still this, you know, it's every day, you know.
Right.
And
Well,
I'm really fortunate that my family, and I feel very blessed to be able to have this time with my children. Like, they're being homeschooled or remote learning the whole time. We pulled them out pretty early, and stuff. But, you know, ordinarily I'm, you know, commuting into Toronto 4 days a week, spending 3 hours a day, like in my car or on the GO train. You know, I'm teaching now, but like my commute is from my bedroom to right here, you know? So just the hours of my life that I've gotten from that. But, you know, I just, yeah, this experience has just made me think about hours and time very differently. And I think it would, you know, that would be very hard on a lot of people as well.
a lot of stuff going on in terms of mental health, and
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And it's, you know, and as an educator, you know, dealing with the students and things like that, it's like, you know, that's honestly my number one concern with them. Like, it's this messed up thing, right? That we're trying to pretend in a way that life is as normal as possible.
trying for sure.
You know? And you know, and I just try to be as understanding as possible that it's really not, you know, like it's really, really not. And, you know, my students, you know, like say first or second year university, which is what I'm teaching this year, you know, that's a stressful time. That can be a stressful time, that transition from high school into university and all of this stuff when things are normal.
When I think back to the importance of those years in terms of meeting people, and
Yeah,
you're starting to let loose, and you know, these are your wilding times, right?
This is your chance to let loose, to break free from both parental and institutional authority, but also to explore and to let your curiosity run free. And there's a huge social dimension to that as well. And unfortunately, for so many, my children are in that position. My nephew and niece are in that position right now.
Yeah,
exactly. And I feel so much for them. I think I would have lost my mind at that age. When I think of the explorations, the new things that I was able to experience every day, and I needed to get out of the house, and I wanted to get away from home, and I wanted to get back to school. So you asked, like, for what age group or for whom has this actually been a good thing for? And I have to say, we've interviewed quite a number of artists through the pandemic. Many of them have responded that when the pandemic started, or into, so far into the pandemic, we'd ask them, how has it impacted on you? And they would say, well, I've been fine because I'm used to working alone. I'm used to sort of tuning out the world anyway. So this has just kind of allowed me to focus even more so in my studio and so on and so forth. I have to say, you're one of the, and I was not like that. I was more like you, where this thing really hit me hard, and it still hits me. And it's a struggle for me to tune out all what's really going on out there. And you're one of the first, I have to say, that I feel like I have a kindred spirit in terms of the struggle. It can be a struggle to create and to be artistic in this kind of environment.
I don't find misery and death particularly inspiring.
No. So of course my experience has been opposite. It's been like such a bountiful year in terms of creative stuff.
There you go.
But that's because I was working from home, and anyway, I was ready to work on these projects.
Right.
I think 2000 I guess we're in 21, so we're in 21 now, right?
We
made it. We got this.
I think 2020 is my least productive year. Like, I think I produced the least amount of art that I produced in my adulthood.
No, it impacts everyone differently. I did want to shift into talking about your work. I started becoming aware of your work probably 2014, 15. I think it was the Postscript show.
Oh, right.
At Robert McLaughlin. So the work was different. It was and I think I probably became aware of it because I was doing kind of abstract map-based kind of paintings for a while, and I thought, oh, these sort of look like that. The patterning, it's a bit like camouflage. It looks like it's referring to landscape. And then at some point it did shift into the more, I don't know if you did describe it as realistic, representational. So I'm just curious about, and I was, just looking at that stuff today, and you referenced that you had done some animation, and that influenced the paintings. The animation itself wasn't accessible through the gallery website, so I for whatever reason.
Fine, but anyways,
So I couldn't see what that was specifically, but so if you could just jump in and start talking about like that body of work, and then how it eventually shifted.
Well, I mean, I was an abstract painter for many years in sort of various ways. Like, my graduate work is all the work I did to get into graduate school. I first sort of became successful in having shows and stuff as an abstract painter. And then the digital stuff came about because, like, I teach sessionally at OCAD, and I got asked if I could teach this class where I needed to be able to do animation. And because it was paying, I said, sure, I can teach that. And so I taught myself how to use this program. And in the process of doing that, it absolutely changed it and created all these ideas of things that I could do. So the first project I did was I made this animation where I remixed a whole bunch of my previous artwork. And it did exactly what you said. It basically kaleidoscopes all my paintings from one into another. And this thing that I made, it had about 6,000 individual frames that made up this I don't know, 6 or 7 minute animation.
Right, right.
And basically what I did was I just looked through these individual frames to find images that I found beautiful and made paintings of them. And then the titles of those paintings were just the frame number of the animation.
Right, okay.
Now the project at the McLaughlin Gallery, it was their first artist, and I was their first artist in residence in that program. And they wanted me to do a special project. So something where I sort of went a little bit outside the what I'd been doing. And so my idea for that was I'd always made these sort of colorful paintings and hung them on white walls. So I thought I'd make white paintings and hang them on colorful walls.
Very cool.
And so I made, I don't know, I did a wall painting that went on 3 of the gallery walls.
Right.
And then I made these white on white textured paintings that I hung onto it. And because it was a residency that lasted, I guess, maybe 2 months, I kept a running sort of blog of how that show evolved and changed over the act of doing it. Because for me, that sort of call and responsiveness is really important to my work. Like that the idea, I'm not someone who just executes ideas to make my work. Like the idea grows and changes through the act of doing. And so, yeah, so the running sort of blog, and it keeps track of I'm someone who writes quite a bit about art. I've used to write quite a bit for magazines and things as well. And so I'm an artist who enjoys doing that. So yeah, I kept this running thing in relation to it. And it was a really great project. And when I finished it, it just felt like I'd said everything that, like, it just was such a big project, and it just felt like it summarized everything that I needed to say about art and sort of digital culture. And this
And it got it out of your system. You got it out of your
system. Like it just, there was, and the romance was over, you know? And in looking for, you know, and I guess when I started to think about, and once again, you know, after taking a break from making art for a bit before starting the next stuff, I started to think about, you know, what I wanted to do. And I'd become increasingly concerned with the environment, specifically, I think because of my children. Like I've known about the environment for a very long time, but all of these things sounded like far off things, like 2030, 2050. You know, what do those numbers mean to me? Well, they mean a lot more when I think my kids will be my age.
That's right.
Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And sort of what, and so I started, you know, researching this stuff a lot and making paintings that dealt with it. And I spent the next, I guess, 5 years dealing with this issue and researching this issue and getting to know, honestly, some of the world's top climate scientists and things like that on a fairly personal level, just through Twitter and things like that. But and really getting to know this, and that body of work, there's about 100 paintings, and they're not really for sale. The idea of them is to just kind of keep showing them in different public venues. Yeah, and in relation to the space, that's become an increasingly important thing for me, is this idea of what is the space that I'm showing the work in, and who am I speaking to?
For sure.
And so the show I did, it was a huge show in Bowmanville. I did it at the Visual Arts Center of Clarington and the public library and the town hall. And the work is really divided into speaking to what I thought of as 3 different types of audiences. So I thought of the gallery audience as being a fairly sympathetic audience to issues surrounding the environment. And so that work really dealt with climate grief and climate anxiety and guilt.
Right.
And then the work in the public library was meant specifically for families and children and parents. And like I did a painting of, there's one that's a painting of a page from Dr. Seuss from
Right.
40 Years of Who.
Yeah.
And it says something, I'll paraphrase, but it's, and the mayor climbed to the top of Eiffelberg Tower, and now cried the mayor, is your time's darkest hour, the time for all whose who have blood that is red to come to their aid of your country, he said. You've got to make noises in greater amounts, so open your voice loud, because every voice counts, you know?
Yeah.
And it says it all, right? But it says it to children. And then the work in the town hall, I considered it very much a political space. And so that work was political. And I made paintings of beautiful landscapes from around our region. And I juxtaposed it with paintings of child climate activists.
Okay, great.
And I just hung them right in the town hall. And so this was right in the time of sort of, you know, Greta Thunberg and all of this stuff happening, and these child protests happening around the world. And we weren't really having them in Bowmanville because as a whole, people that were interested in doing that, like me, we'd go down to Toronto and join a much larger protest there, right? And rather than in Bowmanville. And so my idea was to bring the protest to them, you know? And
No, okay, so the shift to more representational stuff, you just did what you could in terms of
it also, I mean, I think a part of it too is I think a big part of it came from the fact that I started taking pictures all the time because I have a camera in my pocket, you know?
Isn't it
like
amazing?
Everyone else,
Isn't
right?
it amazing? This tool,
you know, like in the 90s, I took no pictures, you know, and then I got a digital camera, but even that you needed to think to bring with you.
And it's heavy, and you had,
you know. But now, like with the cell phone, you just
and so some of the paintings have that feel of immediacy, in that this was a moment. This was something that was in, especially the ones where you feel like, you know, you're walking down the path with your kids, and you could just pulled out your phone because it was such a beautiful moment. And then, you know, like in times past, you either had to take that big camera or you had to stage it.
Yeah.
So it's so beautiful, and it has that feeling of this was a split second that happened that was beautiful, and you captured it. Then when you paint it, you're layering on more layers of, say, personal meaning and emotion to it.
Yeah. Thank you.
And so they have that beauty that comes from familiarity with, you know, like your family, your friends, your environment.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, as opposed to even like say a David Hockney painting, which he sits and paints in situ, but you know it's I don't know, you know, he sat there for 18 hours.
Right.
And you know, he made these decisions based on, and he's probably edited them, you know, while he's painting, where you captured a moment, a split second. Right.
Well, that's kind of you to say. Thank you. The speed of making is something that's really something I like to think about too. Like, I think a lot of artists, they have sort of a speed that they work at. And for me, I like to think of it as a variable that I can manipulate.
Hmm.
And so some of my paintings are very, very quick, and then others are densely layered and take more time. And then there's some that are sort of between those things. I kind of, you know, just as a painter and on a sort of almost a formal material level, I sort of like to ask the question of, you know, where exactly is style located, right? Like, and what does it mean? Because it seems like if I make a painting fast, or I make a painting slow, or I make it whatever, it always still has this thing that makes it feel like mine.
Yeah, I always
And
call that.
I find it, you know, and I think a lot of what people, sort of general people, think an artist's style isn't really what it is.
No, it's like their imprint, you know. I call it the X factor. Or, you know, I worked for 30 years with adults with developmental disabilities and facilitated art classes for about 20 years, and every single one of them had a style.
Yeah.
And I could tell, like, whether there was a name on it or not. I could walk in and say, I know
This
who
person did that. Yeah.
Sometimes they're representational, sometimes they were completely abstract. But there was, you know, it's got to do with your bones, your muscles, your personality and nervous system coming through it. I mean, think about, you know, music, right?
Yeah.
You give a Strat guitar to 5 different guitarists, it's going to sound different. It's the exact same instrument. You can do the exact same rig setup. It's going to sound different.
It comes down to the question of voice and style, or segues from that. You do have a very distinct and a distinct voice and style. How did you arrive at that? Did it just come out of the box, or was there a long process to arrive there, or is it still in progress?
Yeah, no, I that's a good question. I think it's a long process to arrive there, right? Like, I think, because, you know, when I was young, and I think, you know, this is something I see in, you know, almost every year at OCAD, you know, but artists think style is something more than it is, and it needs to be more bombastic, and they need to make it more of a signature and more unique looking, and to them,
A brand.
Exactly. They have to create a visual brand in a lot of ways. And in a lot of ways at OCAD, this isn't a diss on the school I work, but we encourage that. Yeah.
Well, probably most art schools do, right?
Yeah. And we sort of, you know, by the time they leave, we expect them to have sort of their thing. And, you know, and when I left art school myself, I had, you know, my things. And then, I don't know, over the next, in a lot of ways, the process of building to where I am has been stripping away those things.
Oh, interesting.
You know, trying to be as trick-free as possible in it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, your work has a certain honesty or nakedness to it.
Yes.
Right.
Authenticity,
maybe.
But I mean, you're consciously trying to strip away earlier practices?
Yeah.
Did you reach a point where you were going, what the hell am I doing? Or why am I doing it this way? Or is this, am I just being naive doing it?
I think at a certain point, I reached this level of confidence in what I do, you know, and that I don't feel this need to impress anyone with what I do anymore, and I'm comfortable in my own skin as an artist in this way that took me a long time to be, if that makes sense.
That's great.
And so I think I've become more conscious of the fact that, like, I'm questioning style and things like that in the work in recent years.
Mm-hmm.
Is that partly from teaching and having to think about?
I think it is. Yeah. I think I get a lot out of teaching, and it's this way of I think you learn, or I learn things very well when I have to articulate them verbally. When ideas go from being these vague sort of thoughts about things into something where I'm giving somebody practical advice.
Well, and it's one thing to just practice them and use them, right? Which is from years of practice and subtle integration, osmosis. But then, like you say, to have to actually formulate or crystallize some ideas.
Yeah, and there's aspects of it that are conscious, and then there's aspects of it that are just from doing and doing and doing and doing and doing, for years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be a certain, like you say, stripping away of almost like an artifice of creating a style, or I'm going to layer on acidic colors like Peter Doig or Daniel Richter, or to do something that doesn't feel your approach seems to be, like I said, naked, honest. It's like you see it, you've got the moment, and you want to capture the moment.
Yeah. And different paintings, like each painting for me is its own instance, and the image that I'm working with tells me sort of how it should be painted, and then the painting itself tells me how it needs to be finished. Sometimes they're, like I said, long and involved. Like I made a conscious decision, and like I said, if the last work that dealt with sort of artists and mental illness, and this work, that work was meant to be really fast. This work, I'm purposely making it really, I want them small, and I want them more labor intensive. I want them slower. But exactly how slow is still a variable. Like some of them are quicker and some of them are longer, there's still variables within this idea that I want them to be slower and more sort of jewel-like is how I think of them.
Right.
Yeah. And these ones will be for sale, I think, I think it fits with this idea of this owning of desire to own nature, this desire to own art, this, yeah.
You got to sell some of these,
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, I've been running away from it long enough. And I think like the idea was that I wanted to make work, like I said, within this idea of an audience that would fit in a commercial gallery, right? And I don't, like I said, I'm not opposed to commercial galleries, and I love every gallerist I've worked with. Like I was fortunate to work with Catherine Mulheron for many years, and still have a great relationship with Powell McDougall, who moved to New York, and I go stay at her house a lot when that kind of thing. So I mean, I'm not an anti-dealer.
Yeah.
I'm not anti-art buyer either. It's just got to fit, right?
For sure, yeah. And I mean, you were talking about a certain body of work that is more political and in general anyway, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to ask, kind of going back a little bit towards the role of photography in your work.
Mm-hmm.
A few of the paintings I noticed on your Instagram page look like paintings of photographs. In fact, of old photographs.
Right.
What jumped out at me were the images around Hemingway.
Yeah.
There's one painting where he's with his first wife, and I have to say this: when I looked at that painting, and I read the description, this is him and his first wife, I'm thinking, why did he ever leave her? They look so perfect together. They look so, these young bohemians.
They were, yeah.
why in the world did that not last forever? Because they
Just
just,
he's bipolar.
and talk, yeah.
Yeah,
No.
that's why.
Talking
And
about capturing a moment, that moment, the bipolarity, everything else is extraneous to that moment. And in that moment, they just look so wonderful together.
No,
but then you have another photo of Hemingway, which is the opposite end of that spectrum.
With the gun, old man
with
Hemingway.
the gun pointing right at the viewer. And that I found so harrowing.
Yeah.
So just frightening to look at. It was amazing. Now, both of these are pictures of pictures, which is for me a very exciting idea in of itself.
Sure.
It's like, how far removed can you be from the original and still feel this closeness to the original, right?
Yeah.
But and then your style, in a sense, removes you a little bit further from the
Sure.
film.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, you're looking at a photo.
Absolutely.
And I love that tension. I love that.
Yeah, I enjoy that. I enjoy playing with subject matter, if you will. Like there's a painting in that same series and I've done this a few times where I've done paintings of album covers.
Right.
Things like that, which is like a high school move, right? Like who does that? Right? Like high school kids, right? I mean, I did a painting of an album cover by Kanye West, right? Like that's so high school. I'm not even a big fan of Kanye West, but I find him very interesting. He's once again, he's a bipolar artist who's untreated. I'm bipolar. Recently, this has become, I've recently been treated and things are good. But I had a rough few years and things like that. And, the story of artists who are bipolar, a lot of them don't end well. And I think it would be really hard. Like it was hard for me.
Absolutely.
It was hard for me to get help because like I'm pretty successful in my life. And I was pretty worried about how it would affect me. And like, I didn't want it to ruin my art and things like that. I can't imagine being Kanye West. Right. The guys were multiple $1 billion.
Yeah.
Like who in his life is going to give that guy help?
That's right. And who's,
you know what I mean?
Who's going to sit him down and say,
there to say, no, Kanye, you need to go see a doctor and get help because you're not well.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, and is
Pete
going to
Davidson
listen to that person.
Yes.
You know,
unless he somehow just fucks up his life enough that
maybe
he has no choice. But more than likely, when you have money, you just buy your way out of situations.
Yeah. They end badly. They end like Hemingway. They end like Carrie Fisher. They end like.
Well, I don't know if you know.
Carrie Fisher did get help, and she was a big advocate for bipolar awareness.
Right.
So, but she still had her demons. I mean, she's written books like Postcards from the Edge and things like that. So, Kurt Cobain, things didn't go well for him.
Yeah. I don't know if you know Carl Jung's famous saying about artists. He said sometimes the sweetest fruit hangs on the most fragile branches.
Right.
And it really addresses that. Some of the most beautiful, sensitive, creative people. One can argue whether they're that way because of their condition or past trauma, or despite it, but it does go hand in hand.
I forget in the research I did the exact number, but artists are something like, I'm gonna guesstimate the number here, but it was around this. There's something like 14 times more likely to suffer from bipolar than non-artists. But people who are bipolar aren't necessarily more likely to be artists.
That's right.
Was the way they phrased it.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it's just so that body of work dealt with this, and also how the myth of the artist, and the artistic genius, sort of interferes with is dangerous.
Right.
For sure.
And like Van Gogh cutting off his ear and all this.
Sure. Oh well, he's an artist, right?
So many, right? So many of these stories, and artists have this extra sort of burden on them that like there's this cultural expectation placed upon us that isn't really fair to us. And and like I said, and I think it's dangerous. And so, yeah, like I wanted to, you know, specifically speak to artists and particularly young artists, you know, that like I'm a, you know, I'm a professor. I've done fairly well in my life and all these things. And I do have influence on,
Well, and yeah,
on younger generations. And so,
well,
you
and
know,
it's also great to see that places like OCAD and universities actually have wellness centers.
they
When I was,
do.
when I was at OCAD, there was a nurse.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and if you had issues, I don't know what you did. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
just go to the pub.
That's it. That's it.
There's obviously an advocacy component to this body of work for you, but it's also something, as you said, something very personal to you. Do you find that difficult to get at? I mean, emotionally, I would find it really tough to address something like that.
Yeah, I don't know, for me, yeah, I don't know, I'm fairly good at that. Like I'm fairly good with that, and like part of the process for me was me, like I said, I was learning about my own condition through the act of making this stuff. Like I was reading papers on the relationship between artists and mental illness. I was reading books by Hemingway. I was, you know, biographies and things about, and so that work, it mostly, you know, I'm mostly looking at the artists I chose to do paintings of were Virginia Woolf, Hemingway, so artists who lived in a time before there were really treatment options available. Mm-hmm. And then Carrie Fisher and Kurt Cobain, who, you know, Carrie Fisher was an advocate, but, you know, had a lot of trouble as well. And Kurt Cobain kind of came and went in his kind of thing, and things obviously went badly for him. And then the only living artist I was focusing on was Kanye West. You know, and he's famous for the crazy things he does.
Sure,
right?
yeah.
You know, like, and his acting out and things like that. And a lot of people have very little, you know, I just have a lot of empathy for him, you know. And the album cover I did, it's, and this is what really drew me to him. And I bought the record just because of the album cover. And it says, I hate being bipolar. It's awesome. You know. and then it's got these beautiful mountains, and I just thought it was so, it's exactly just kind of the experience sort of it and things. So it's still, it is part of, you know, me too.
Sure.
So, but yeah, like I said, there's an advocacy for sure component to what I do. I think, you know, as a whole, you know, I had this sort of, when I finished that body of work for the McLaughlin Gallery and I was thinking about what I want to do, I made it sound much calmer than what it was. There was a kind of a crisis about why I'm doing what I'm doing. You know, like, what am I doing? Like I've now, you know, I've had museum shows now. I'm selling work to, you know, I was selling work for major corporations and had work included, and I'm like, okay, so like, you know, is this all there is? Like, is
right,
this,
right.
like, what am I doing? Like, that's
so you did have one of those. You did.
Yeah, and even just at my career. As my career teaching, right? Like I'd kind of reached this place in it where I realized, like, I'm a sessional lecturer. I'm never probably going to be tenured for various reasons. But I'm very secure in my position, and it's never going away. And I'm basically, this is where I am until I'm done, you know, and stuff. And so a lot of things, and also, you know, dealing with, and at the time I didn't necessarily realize I was dealing with this these mental problems that I was, because you know, although I've had them my whole life, they kind of escalated as I got older and intensified, which is pretty normal.
Sure.
And so a lot of things kind of collided into me needing to switch gears about and feel value in what I was doing. And that, yeah, like I wanted to make art. I wanted to use what I have to help people in some way, you know? And so I think that was important, certainly in both the next two bodies of work, that I felt a kind of obligation that I have these abilities and I have this platform, and I want to do good with them. I don't want to just make more money.
Right,
and stuff.
right. Yes.
When I started researching climate grief and solastalgia and these kinds of ideas, they really, solastalgia is this condition referred to by this Australian philosopher, and it's the condition of feeling homesick or lost when you haven't left home, right? That the world that you, and he was specifically talking about like these Australian farmers who'd lived for generations, you know, farming this land that's disappearing, right? The soil's going.
Right, right.
And the feeling of loss and melancholy that they'd have for this life that was eroding with the soil, you know? And then there's some wonderful work by this Canadian, Ashley Consolo. She's out of Memorial University, and she does work with Inuit. Okay. And it's the same condition.
I was just going to say, I bet a lot of Indigenous people have that condition. I told you.
Yeah.
And on your land, that's not your land anymore.
You know, like there's this really haunting quote that she got from an elder there, and he said, "Our tribe, the name of our tribe is the people of the sea ice. So if there's no more sea ice, are we still a people?"
Oh my God, eh? Yeah.
You know? And but reading this kind of stuff and things, and then getting in contact with people who specialize in it and things like that, and in this area, you know, the best way to deal with that grief is to take action, right? Even in small ways, but just to feel like
a lot of the
you're doing something, yeah, and you're not just a victim of.
So one of the things they've discovered in trauma recovery is that if something traumatic happens, if you freeze, then you have more likely going to have a lot more trauma later in life, as opposed to if you fought back or ran, you actually physically did something. So right. There's that sort of that there's an empowerment to even running away or taking action, and you know, the energy of that trauma doesn't get frozen into your body and later wreak havoc. And it's that kind of thing, like it's an empowerment to do something about whatever, whether it's, you know, if it's grief around, you know, I mean, you know, you just have to look at the condition of the world, and you can either be totally destroyed by it, or just say, these are my skills, this is what I'm going to do, right? It doesn't have to be, I don't know if you know the writer Charles Eisenstein. He wrote a book called, he wrote a book called, oh shit, what was it? Sacred Economy. But then his most recent book was The More Beautiful World That Our Hearts Know Is Possible. So he's an environmentalist, he's a philosopher. Sure. But, you know, people would write to him and say, oh, well, you know, I want to do more, but, you know, I have to take care of my ailing mom, so I can't be out protesting. He said, sure. What is more valuable or valid to helping the world and actually taking care of someone. And
Yeah.
he put it in that perspective is every little act of kindness is doing something.
Yeah. And, I think this, as the situation worsens, and this is how it dovetails into sort of mental health and things too, right? Because like, as our situation continues to get worse, like climate anxiety, ecological grief and mourning, these are going to become like things that aren't just felt on the fringes, right? It's all rooted in the old Western binary of man and nature, right? Yeah. Where we created us as separate,
sure,
from nature,
sure,
rather than a part of it, right?
Just before we go, what's coming down the pike for you, besides more painting?
Yeah, honestly, I mean, from a exhibitions perspective and all that, I'm just kind of treading water for a little while. I just don't feel, I mean, I should probably get off my butt and apply for some things, but I've never been a big, I joke, I've never been a big stamp licker. I mostly get things from people asking me to do things, and
you meet people in person, you go to an opening, you have a cocktail, and it's like, hey.
And I just think too, I'm not someone who'd be like, I'm really fortunate that Bowmanville show, I squeaked it in under the wire, right? Like, I was supposed to give my artist talk on the closing reception, and that was like the day the world ended. So I literally just squeaked it in, and it would have been so awful if those 5 years of work would have just been an online exhibition.
Right.
I'm really not interested in that. Like, my work, the physicality of my work is very important. So I'm someone who gets a lot of mileage. I enjoy interactions like in that way with the communities that I have on Instagram and things like that. And I get, good interaction and peership from those, just like I do with Facebook or whatever. But I'm, for the most part, content to work away. And then, like I said, when I've got this next body of work, I have some ideas of people I'd like to pitch it to. And then I'll probably do some stamp licking at some point too with the work I've already built up. But you know how it is, you kind of get focused on the next thing you're doing and that. So yeah, we'll see where it goes. I'm just in a good making place, but I'm in a place too where I don't have all the answers for what I'm doing right yet. And there's new parallels emerging from doing. And I want to allow those to percolate a little bit before I commit to
so just
bringing it out into the world.
Those things out. What's your sense of like the post-pandemic world in terms of the art? We've talked to a few people about this.
Yeah, I mean,
like.
Talk about rendering the familiar unfamiliar and trauma. I mean, we're all crawling out of, well, we've all experienced that for the past year. Do you think that, I don't know. I mean, is there a chance that coming out of this, there'll be more people looking towards, taking a more sympathetic approach to climate change and to the environment?
And I'm really not sure. And I think that's, this has just been such a crazy experience. And I just really I have no real predictions about how this is going to impact things going forward, like in any facet, right? Like, other than, I have one prediction. I think birthday candles are over. Yeah, that's
I'm fine with that. But
no one is ever going to blow out birthday candles ever again.
Really? Okay. We'll see.
That's right. You just blew all over the cake. I'm not eating it.
All right, everybody, you heard that here. We'll talk again in 2 years from now and see if people are still blowing up birthday candles.
Well, Pete, it's been great chatting with you, and
Fantastic.
great to follow your work and see where it's going. And I'm now following on Instagram. Just found
Yeah.
out today.
Yeah.
So it'll be great to see where things go. And yeah. And
We look forward to seeing the next stages of your journey.
for sure.
Great. Thanks, guys. It was fun.
It was awesome.
Right.
Thank you.
All right.
Take care.
Take care, man.
Bye.
Bye.
Stay safe.
Yeah, you too.
Stay creative.
Yeah.